I'll request Mama to read the
Yes.
yeah to read the first page. So today we'll do 7 realities. How to love God tomorrow.
The seven realities: existence, love, sacrifice, renunciation, knowledge, control, and surrender. I give no importance to creed, dogma, caste, or performance of religious ceremonies and rites, but to the understanding of the following seven realities. Number one, the only real existence is that of one and only God, who is the self in the finite self. Number two, the only real love is the love for the infinity God, which arouses an intense longing to see, know, and become one with its truth, God. The only real sacrifice is that in which, in pursuance of this love, all things, body, mind, position, welfare, and even life itself are sacrificed. The only real renunciation is that which abandons, even in the midst of worldly duties, all selfish thoughts and desires. The only real knowledge is the knowledge that God is the inner dweller in good people and the so-called bad, in saints and in the so-called sinner. This knowledge requires you to help all equally as circumstances demand, without expectation of reward, when compelled to take part in a dispute, to act without the slightest trace of enmity or hatred, to try to make others happy with brotherly or sisterly feeling for each one, and to harm no one in thought, word, or deed, not even those who harm you. The only real control is the discipline of the senses to abstain from indulgence in low desires, which alone ensures absolute purity of character. The only real surrender is that in which poise is undisturbed by any adverse circumstance, and the individual, amidst every kind of hardship, is resigned with perfect calm to the will of God. Jai Baba.
Jai Baba. Thank you. So with that, we'll continue with selfless service, which is where we were. Just trying to get the, yeah. Okay, so we were talking about service, so requesting all to go on mute. Serving master facilitates enlightenment. Nevertheless, the spirit of service that is invariably present in aspirants and good persons can be harnessed and creatively utilized for spiritual purposes if it is allied with the work of a master. The master serves the whole universe out of the finality of his infinite consciousness, and those who serve the master and obey him also have their share in his universal work. Their service has the advantage of his wisdom and insight. Willing participation in the work of the master not only raises the value of service but creates the best opportunities for spiritual enlightenment. Service originating in the instructions of the master is second in importance only to the service rendered by the master himself. One sec, I'll probably mute all this. Somebody. Yeah. Service free from attachment to results. For most persons, the idea of service is inextricably bound with securing certain definite results in the objective world. For them, service consists in the removal of human suffering or illiteracy or other difficulties and handicaps that thwart the flourishing of individual or social life. This is the type of service rendered by aspirants, politicians, social reformers, and other good people. Though this type of service is of immense spiritual importance, it is in its very nature unending. in spite of what any individual might attain in these fields, there always remains much that is to be achieved. Therefore, as long as the idea of service is thus tied to the idea of results, it is inevitably fraught with a sense of incompleteness. There can be no realization of infinity through the pursuit of never-ending series of consequences. Those who aim at sure and definite results through a life of service have an eternal burden on their minds. Service after realization. On the other hand, service that comes after realization of the truth is a spontaneous expression of spiritual understanding of the true nature of the self. And though it also brings about important results in the objective world, it is in no way complicated by any longing for them. The sun shines because it is in its nature to do so, and not because it wants to achieve something through shining. In the same way, the God-realized person also lives a life of self-offering because of the basic structure of the divine life that is at the heart of reality, and not because he longs to achieve anything. His life is not a reaching out towards something with the hope of some kind of attainment. He does not seek enrichment through attainments, but is already established in the fullness of the realization of the infinite. The overflow of his being is a blessing to life in other forms, and actually brings about their upliftment from the material as well as the spiritual point of view. As his own happiness is grounded in the realization of the divinity within him, it does not suffer any diminution due to the imperfection or suffering of life in other forms. And his consciousness is not tinged by the ache of something unrealized. There is thus a vast gulf between service before the realization of the truth and service after realizing it. The life of the man God is a life of service. It is a perpetual offering to other forms of his own self. This service, which is characteristic of the life of a God-realized person, is fundamentally different from service found in the lives of those who have not realized the truth. So I think in summary, Baba is very categorical that the preference clearly is for doing service and selfless service post-realization, and that's the most superior form of service. And obviously, that's what I could take away from this.
Yeah, in the message that Baba has given to his workers, so that message is also a collaboration of whatever similar to the message that he is giving is that you have to serve and you should be thankful to me that you have got to do my job, and you have to work as sons of the same father, and with a brotherly love and attitude you have to serve, do my work. Otherwise, your work is of no use to me. I can manage to do my own work. So the people who are involved in Baba work, so that's the kind of service that we are doing in his love. That's a very important message.
Yeah. Any other comments? And Kama, your summary?
Yeah, Jai Baba, I think that because it's a continuation of yesterday's reading, so we kind of, I don't know, I forgot, but I think this chapter is important in the sense it talks about selfless service, which comes under the category of Karma Yoga. And as you read in the last two paragraphs, service that comes after realization of the truth is a spontaneous expression of spiritual understanding of the true nature of the self. So only when you have God realization in the seventh plane, the kind of service that is done is spontaneous, which we call it as pure inaction. But before that, when we are in the planes, or even when we are in the gross plane, we have to use our intelligence, in the intelligent action, aspect. So we have to be very, very diligent, whenever we are doing selfless service, that it is not about creating more sanskaras. And in the earlier reading, there's another quote which said on page number 90, However, when he renders selfless service with spiritual understanding, it not only confers spiritual benefit upon himself, but also promotes the material and spiritual well being of others involved. Selfless service must be based upon understanding if it is to be an unmixed boon for all concerned. So, this word spiritual understanding is a very key word to note when we read the discourses, basically. You know, I think the whole discourses is one of the ways of looking at it is it's a guide for spiritual understanding. Now, what is spiritual understanding is, according to my, what I have understood, is that all those messages from seven realities, my wish, how to love God, Hafiz sayings, 12 ways of realizing me, the three prayers, all those things, if you are able to implement with total self awareness, that to me is a form of spiritual understanding. So I think the last all these readings that we have done was based on knowledge. We were doing all the knowledge aspect. But starting from this chapter and the last chapter we read action in action, it is about the right action aspect. So now on this whole this particular block, yoga and meditation deals with the action part, which I call as 99% perspiration. So that is the takeaway. Jai Baba.
Yeah, thank you. Any other questions or clarifications before we continue?
Also, there is a desire to serve people. Few people have this, they lack something in life and they like to serve people or they like to do something about it. It is also, again, somewhere entanglement. And when you creatively imagine that I like to serve people, you create a person who is in need. So this is where the game starts. This is where this energy of the other person, I like to serve something. Then you already created a person who is in need. So this is where a spiritual person has to be very, very alert about it. Just be spontaneous, just be ready for anything. But don't have this inclination to serve people or to be a social server, going into all that mode. Just be yourself. If it happens, if it is comes in front of you, then it's fine. Otherwise, to have this longing or the wish to serve people, they are very rare, which master allows you to do that. Very rare people, not all. So one has to be very clear on this path. Very, uh, you know, one has to understand that by serving people, what is the meaning of serving people. Thank you.
Yeah,
I think
thank you.
this is stated on the page 91 as we read. The consciousness that I'm obliging someone is the first to occur during the process of serving, but it can be annulled by the contrary thought. I'm obliged by being given this opportunity of serving. The latter thought facilitates the attitude of detachment and secures freedom from the bondage of good actions.
Yes, everything is
Exactly.
Baba. Always say Baba. It's for Baba. The one has to take Baba's name all the time. And just the idea or it start wherever it starts from, you have to take Baba's name from there. And let's see how he takes you to that. Uh, Whatever incidents or whatever happens, you have to be with Baba all the time to be protected.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Neha and Sunil.
Yeah.
So, what looks spiritually harmless and actually, in a sense, positive, Baba has categorically said that be careful. Be careful on what it means to do selfless service and what is the true selfless service. It's a good, very good chapter. It was very, it's an eye opener for me. So, 1 second, I'll just show you. So this is what Kama was saying. So we have finished action and inaction and selfless service from yoga and meditation. We are now going to do types of meditation. Then there's
Karthik, what I would
Yeah.
suggest now is the types of meditation we'll do at the end of this
Okay.
particular
So,
block.
okay.
So I think go for task for us, the work for the spiritual freedom of humanity, which is on page 340,
Okay.
340. Those two
That's not even
chapters.
part of this.
And the physical book, which page is
Yes.
that?
Yes. It's
Page number
340.
340.
340.
Work for the spiritual freedom of humanity. Cry for freedom. All over the world, the spirit of man is crying out for freedom. Love of freedom and the search for freedom are the principal characteristics of humanity. In all races and in all climes, in all countries and at all times, the watchword for groping and struggling humanity has always been freedom. There are very few persons, however, who really understand the full implications of true and unqualified freedom. And there are many who, in their partial understanding of the real conditions of freedom, strive only for the attainment of that kind of existence which gives them a sense of relative freedom. Thus, different persons long for different kinds of freedom according to the different things they have come to value. Kinds of freedom. Freedom to live as one wishes is sought in all spheres of life. This imperative demand for freedom usually expresses itself by fastening upon some external conditions of the kind of existence people wish to lead. Hence, those who identify their being with their country seek national or political freedom. Those who are animated by economic purposes seek economic freedom. Those who are inspired by religious aspirations seek freedom of religion. Those who are enthusiastic about sociological or cultural ideology seek freedom of movement and freedom to express the ideals that they cherish and wish to propagate. But there are few who realize that the basic freedom, which alone gives the stamp of true value to any of these different kinds of relative freedom, is spiritual freedom. Even if all the external conditions of a free life were completely fulfilled and guaranteed, the soul of man would still remain in woeful bondage if it failed to realize spiritual freedom. Limits of freedom. All the different types of freedom that fasten upon some external conditions must, in their very nature, exist within certain limits. For the freedom that a, for the for the freedom that an individual or community or state seeks must be consistent with a similar freedom for other individuals, communities, or states. National, economic, religious, or cultural freedom expresses itself in and by means of the duality of existence. It lives on duality and is sustained by duality. Therefore, it has to be relative and limited and cannot be infinite. It exists in varying degrees. Even when it is won through persistent effort, it cannot be a permanent attainment, since the external conditions, having once been secured, are not secured forever but are capable of deteriorating in the course of time. Spiritual freedom alone is unlimited. Only spiritual freedom is absolute and unlimited. When it is won through persistent effort, it is secured forever. Though spiritual freedom can and does express itself in and through the duality of existence, it is grounded in the realization of the inviolable unity of all life and is sustained by it. One important condition of spiritual freedom is freedom from all wanting. It is want that fetters life through attachment to conditions that would fulfill that want. If there is no want, there is no dependence or limitation. The soul is enslaved through wanting. When the soul breaks asunder the shackles of wanting, it emancipates itself from its bondage to the bodies, gross, subtle, and mental. This is the spiritual freedom that brings with it the final realization of the unity of all life and puts an end to all doubts and worries. Importance of spiritual freedom. It is only in spiritual freedom that one can have abiding happiness and unimpaired self knowledge. It is only in spiritual freedom that there arises the supreme certainty of truth. It is only in spiritual freedom that there is the final ending of sorrow and limitation. It is only in spiritual freedom that one can live for all and yet be detached in the midst of all activities. Any lesser type of freedom is comparable to a house built on sand, and any lesser type of attainment is fraught with the fear of decay. Therefore, there is no greater than the gift of spiritual freedom, and there is no task more important than the task of helping others to achieve spiritual freedom. Those who have understood the supreme importance of spiritual freedom have not only to strive for it for themselves, but also to share the God given duty of helping others win it. True service. Those who are inspired by a spirit of selfless service are quick to render unto humanity all possible help through provision of the necessities of life, like clothes and shelter, food and medicine, education, and other amenities of civilization. In pursuing the path of duty, they are not only prepared to fight for the weak against aggression and oppression, but also to lay down their very lives for the sake of others. All these types of service are great and good, but from the ultimate point of view, the help that secures spiritual freedom for humanity surpasses them all. It is insuperable in importance. Way to help others attain spiritual freedom. The way to help others attain spiritual freedom is far different from the way of rendering other types of help. For the hungry, you can provide food and they have only to eat it. For the naked, you can provide clothes and they have only to wear them. For the homeless, you can provide houses and they have only to dwell in them. For those who are in the agonies of spiritual bondage, however, there is no ready-made provision that can give them immediate relief. Spiritual freedom has to be won by oneself, for oneself, through watchful and unfailing war against the lower self and the lower desires. Those who would be soldiers in the cause of truth have to help all, not only in launching upon the thrilling enterprise of attaining victory over themselves, but also in every step they take toward that attainment. There is no other way of sharing their burden. The call. I have full confidence that you, my devotees, will share this burden. Many of you, for years together, have obeyed my orders and carried out my instructions through faith in me and love for me. You have stuck to me and my spiritual cause through storm and stress and thick and thin. Now the time has come for you to offer all your services in my mission of helping humanity tread the spiritual path and realize God. The eternal truth that God alone is real has to be clearly understood and unreservedly accepted, and it has to be unequivocably expressed through words and deeds. In the full realization of the truth, humanity shall attain spiritual freedom. No sacrifice is too big to set man free from spiritual bondage and help him to inherit the truth, which alone shall bring abiding peace to all, and which alone will sustain an unassailable sense of universal fellowhood, cemented by the ungrudging love of all, for all, as expressions of the same reality. In this God-willed, divinely planned, and predestined task of bringing spiritual freedom to humanity, you, my devotees, have to help me, even at the cost of your lives. In your duty of helping others to find God, you have to welcome every type of suffering and sacrifice. Fantastic. So,
Action list for us.
absolutely.
The best,
I
the
think
best. That's what I am. I am Aries man, so I always try to find some action. So, so here, the best thing that we can do is to live a life of which exemplifies Baba's teachings. That's a very big responsibility that Baba is giving us, and telling people about Baba and the right spiritual path. Basically, that's the best thing that probably we can do, and of course, other things come out of that attitude. Out of that living the rest of the service actions will always rectify themselves in us. That's what I think.
Yeah.
Well
And with
said.
his grace is the most important thing in this
Yeah, yeah.
also.
Grace is, ma'am, grace is his thing to give us. Actually, that's not something
Yeah,
that we can.
His
It's
gift.
only a
that's
wish
right.
that when he
Without that,
wishes,
he
he'll
can't
give
reach
us.
anywhere.
Yeah, yeah, that's
Yeah.
correct.
Yeah.
That's correct.
So I think this was a very this is the first time it's in. I mean, if you look at it,
This is a
it's a
kind
direct
of
one-on-one
universe with
message.
Baba. Sorry.
Yeah, yeah. Go ahead.
This is a kind of universe that Baba is, like us to live, isn't it?
Yes.
The avatarhood and everything this is the culmination of everything. It is very important. So the house, the money, the finance, he doesn't want. He wants the spiritual freedom of all humanity. That's his mission.
Yes. Okay. So I'll continue. The next chapter is
I have a comment here.
sure, Kama.
Okay. I think what we have to understand here is that it's not just spiritual freedom. There are two kinds of freedom we are looking. One is material freedom and one is spiritual freedom. This, if you take the example of Maslow's hierarchy of self-actualization, first you have to have your roti kapda makan, then you have a personal life, professional life, and then you go through that aspect of self-esteem, and then the topmost part is self-actualization, which is basically God realization and self-realization. So there is a quote out here. It says, even if all the external conditions of a free life were completely fulfilled and guaranteed, the soul of man would still remain in woeful bondage if it failed to realize spiritual freedom. I think this is the struggle which is happening to a lot of people who have made it in life, like what I call as, the dot-com millionaires and all those guys, and then again, I'm using the case study of Rajat Gupta, So there has to be a balance between material freedom and spiritual freedom. I think it's important to be practical first, to do your duties and responsibilities rather than keep saying this blah, blah, blah thing, I mean, it's great, And the quote about grace, this I'm quoting from Ramana Maharshi. He said, grace is always around us. You are not available to it. So it is our incapacity to be able to get that grace because we have not fine-tuned ourselves. So this is another way of saying that when does Baba's grace come? When you're ready, when you deserve it. And the other thing it says that it is only in spiritual freedom one can have abiding happiness and unimpaired self-knowledge. There is no gift greater than the gift of spiritual freedom, and there is no task more important than the task of helping others to achieve spiritual freedom. Those who have understood the supreme importance of spiritual freedom have not only to strive for it for themselves, but also to share the God-given duty of helping others win it, which is what Sanjay Nigam was talking about. Another quote, he says, spiritual freedom has to be won by oneself for oneself through watchful and unfailing war against the lower self and the lower desires. Those who would be soldiers in the cause of truth have to help all, not only in launching upon the thrilling enterprise of attaining victory over themselves, but also in every step they take toward that attainment. So it's almost like a business, thrilling enterprise. I love the word, the way he uses it, that we have to, even when we are preaching about Baba to other people, I think we have to be very cognizant. Am I following Baba's messages?
Yes.
Because I think the ego, I'm paranoid. I think the biggest paranoia I have is like, I should not get a spiritual ego. Because as Baba says somewhere in the discourses, the ego is hydra headed, it will come in many different forms. And, we'll think that, oh, I'm a Baba lover, I'm going to talk about Baba everywhere, but the important takeaway from this chapter and also the next chapter, because they are connected, that we have to work on ourselves first before we talk about, whatever, preaching about Baba. And the other thing is, these two chapters to me are templates given by Baba, how we can actually, be in the Baba community and how we can do the form of selfless service that he's talking about. So it's a great template, how to be in the, how we, how we implement Baba's messages in our own life. Jai Baba.
Thanks, Kama.
Vidya, any comments from your side?
I think most of it is already said, and I think we are very much in sync today because everything that is Baba has given most of the instructions, and they're pretty clear. It is about how we process it and how we really put things in action now. The way I do it is like I look at my five. This is the template that Baba has given. For example, I'll take this template and apply my life to this template and see what I'm doing now, and where is the opportunity to do better, because convincing myself and saying that I am doing a great job actually puts me at a stance. I mean, it doesn't give me any growth, and I am someone who always look for growth. So I look at this template and look at where is the opportunity for growth, where can I do better. And there are certain embedded warnings that Baba has given in this chapter, and he talks about what is the real freedom that one should work at. And actually that test of that acid test is required to see where am I, and am I really eligible to work, or I need to work on myself, and then which are the gross areas that I need improvement. And I always put the template like that and test that, and then I take it forward from there. So if this template is of any help to other people, one can use it, because ultimately it is spiritual freedom that all of us are striving for, according to me. Jai Baba.
Jai Baba. So is the template reference that you made in a general sense, or is in a specific sense that you've built something? If there is something like that, we'd like to see it. But if you're talking in the general sense of selflessness and post-realization service that Baba's talking about, that's fine.
I think, see, the first step starts with our gross life, obviously, the material life, which we are all leading. That's the first step there. And I have a template, very clear in my mind and apply in my life. I have never gone and shared it with other people, this template. But if you want, I will try to put it as a PPT if anybody is interested to see, and see if that benefits.
Sure,
yeah,
why
that'll
not?
be very nice. Yeah,
Sure, why not?
it's easy
That'd
to
be
follow
nice.
templates.
Okay, so I will try to give me a couple of days. It is a little difficult task, but I will try to put that and share it with you all.
Great.
But remember, each one to his own. This journey is unique.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, actually, I was
Don't
about
forget.
to say that. Actually, in fact, all of us must prepare after talking on this subject our own templates. If we,
Yes,
even if
I
we
think
don't
so.
have, we will have our templates in our minds, but we can always put it down and then share with each other,
Yeah,
and then build up a
but
template.
Vidya,
Build up a template together, maybe. Most of us. Yeah.
Vidya's will be a cheat sheet,
Sorry?
Okay.
Sorry? I didn't get that.
I said yours will be a cheat sheet, so we'll know what to do quickly.
Perfect.
I think all of us have done some marvelous work. It is about writing it. Once you write, you know how much you have really accomplished in your life.
Exactly.
The life is such a big thing, no? It is not a small time. All of us have spent some 50, 60, 70 years of our life. That is not a small time. And we should not discount it just like that.
We are not 50 years, come on. We are less than that.
I'm sorry. You are
Maybe collective age is that much, not
much
us.
younger. Yeah. So
I'm
whatever.
a few hundred years, definitely.
I think, yeah, it'll be nice if all of us
How
write
old you
what
feel.
Yeah, we'll do that.
Okay,
Yeah, Prabhu.
great. So we move on to the next chapter, which is continuing on to page 344 on the physical book. Task for spiritual workers. Be torchbearers for humanity. I'm very happy that in response to my call, you have gathered to receive my message to you. On the path, the most important condition of discipleship is a readiness to work for the spiritual cause of bringing humanity closer and closer to the realization of God. I am glad to note that through faith and love for me, you have wholeheartedly offered yourselves to share in my universal work of spiritualizing the world. I have full confidence that you will not only inherit for yourselves the truth that I bring, but also become enthusiastic and valiant bearers for humanity, which is enveloped in deep ignorance. Nature of spiritual work. Because of its supreme importance for the true and final well-being of humanity, spiritual work has a natural and imperative claim on all who love humanity. It is therefore very necessary to be quite clear about its nature. The whole world is firmly established in the false idea of separateness and being caught up in the illusion of duality. It is subject to the all complexities of duality. I'll read that again, I didn't read it right. The whole world is firmly established in the false idea of separateness, and being caught up in the illusion of duality, it is subject to all complexities of duality. Spiritual workers have to redeem the world from the throes of imagined duality by bringing home to it the truth of the unity of all life. The cause of the illusion of manyness is that the soul, in its ignorance, identifies itself with its bodies. The gross, subtle, and mental bodies are all mediums for experiencing through the ego mind the different states of the world of duality. The title of this section is Origin of Manyness. But they cannot be the mediums for knowing the true nature of the soul, which is above them all. He's referring to the bodies. By identifying with the bodies, the soul gets caught up in the ignorance of manyness. The soul in all the bodies with the ego mind is really one undivided existence. However, as it gets mixed up with these bodies and the ego mind, which are only its vehicles, it considers itself as limited, and it looks upon itself as being only one among the many of creation, instead of looking upon itself as the only one reality without a second. States of consciousness. Every soul is eternally and inviolably one with the one undivided and indivisible universal soul, which is the soul reality. Yet, false identification with the bodies and the ego mind creates the illusion of manyness and of differentiation within the whole. The bodies with the ego mind are only the mediums or the vehicles of consciousness, and as the soul experiences the different inner planes through its different mediums or vehicles, it goes through different states of consciousness. God realization. Most souls are unconscious of their true nature as God, who is the unity and the reality of all souls. God realization is latent in them since it has not yet come to be experienced consciously. Those who have cast off the veil of duality experience the soul through itself independently of any mediums or vehicles. In this experience, the soul consciously knows itself as being identical with God. Life in the truth of the unity of all brings with it freedom from all limitations and sufferings. It is the self-affirmation of the infinite as infinite. In this state of spiritual freedom and perfection, the ego life is finally and completely surrendered in order to experience and release the divine life in the truth. And God is known and affirmed as the only reality worth living for. Importance of time. To realize God is to dwell in eternity. It is a timeless experience. But spiritual work must be done for the souls who are caught up in the mazes of creation, which is bound by time. Spiritual workers cannot afford to ignore the element of time in creation. To ignore time would be to ignore the spiritual work itself. It is imperative to be discriminatingly aware of the flow of time in creation and to appreciate fully the supreme importance of the moment in the future that shall witness the universal dispensation of the truth of spiritual wisdom. Task for for spiritual workers. The task.
Karthik,
Yeah,
I have a suggestion. Sorry to interrupt.
sure.
If we could make these pages, these paragraphs, something like a prayer, a meditation for meditation. This will be wonderful for all of us. In morning, evening, if we keep on doing these, only for focus on these pages, only on these paragraphs, it will help us a lot, a lot.
Sure. I think it's a
So,
personal
yeah,
exercise.
it's my personal, it's my suggestion. If anyone
Yes.
would like to take it forward.
So Neha, would you do that?
Yes, I would love to.
Take the
I'm thinking
responsibility.
on that line. I'm
Yeah.
thinking on that line. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Thank
So, task for spiritual workers. The task for spiritual workers is to help me in this universal dispensation of the truth to suffering humanity. You have not only to prepare humanity to receive this truth, but also to get established in it yourself. It is extremely important to remember that you can help others to gain spiritual freedom and to come out of the illusion of duality only if you yourself do not forget this idea of unity while working for others who are inclined to create divisions where they do not exist and who thus allow no respite to spiritual workers. The minds of people have to be completely purged of all forms of selfishness and narrowness if they are to inherit the life in eternity that I bring. It is by no means an easy task to persuade people to give up their selfishness and narrowness. It is not by accident that people are divided into the rich and the poor, the pampered and the neglected, the rulers and the ruled, the leaders and the masses, the oppressors and the oppressed, the high and the low, the winners of laurels and the recipients of ignominy. These differences have been created and sustained by those who, through their spiritual ignorance, are attached to them and who are so settled in perverse thinking and feeling that they are not even conscious of their perversity. They are accustomed to look upon life as divided into inviolable compartments, and they are unwilling to give up their separative attitude. When you launch upon your spiritual work, you will be entering into a field of divisions that people desperately cling to and that they accentuate and strive to perpetuate consciously or unconsciously. Win people to life of truth. Mere condemnation of these divisions will not enable you to destroy them. The divisions are being nourished by separative thinking and feeling, which can yield only to the touch of love and understanding. You have to win people to the life of truth. You cannot coerce them into spirituality. It is not enough that you should have unimpaired friendliness and untarnished goodwill in your own hearts. If you are to succeed in your work, you have to bring home to them the faith and the conviction that you're helping them to redeem themselves from bondage and suffering and to realize the highest to which they are rightful heirs. There is no other way to help them attain spiritual freedom and enlightenment. For rendering spiritual help, you should have a clear understanding of the following 4 points. First point, apparent descent to a lower level. Hints for spiritual workers. It may often be necessary for you to apparently descend to the lower level of those who you are trying to help. Though your purpose is to raise people to higher levels of consciousness, they might fail to profit by what you say if you do not talk in terms they understand. What you convey to them through your thoughts and feelings should not go over their heads. They are bound to miss the point unless you adapt it to their capacity and experience. However, it is equally important to remember that while doing this, you should not actually lose your own high level of understanding. You will change your approach and technique as they gradually arrive at deeper and deeper understanding, and your apparent descent to the lower level will only be temporary. Second point, spiritual understanding ensures all-sided progress. You must not divide life into departments and then begin to deal with each department separately and exclusively. Departmentalized thinking is often an obstacle to integral vision. Thus, if you divide life into politics, education, morality, material advancement, science, art, religion, mysticism, and culture, and then think exclusively of only one of these aspects, the solutions that you bring to life can neither be satisfactory nor final. But if you succeed in awakening spiritual inspiration and understanding, progress in all these spheres of life is bound to follow automatically. You will have to aim at providing, as spiritual workers, a complete and real solution for all the individual and social problems of life. 3. Spiritual progress consists in the spontaneous growth of understanding from within. As spiritual workers, you have also to remember that the spiritual wisdom you desire to convey to others is already latent in them, and that you have only to be instrumental in unveiling that spiritual wisdom. Spiritual progress is not a process of accumulating from without. It is a process of unfoldment from within. A perfect master is absolutely necessary for anyone to arrive at self-knowledge. But the true significance of the help given by the master consists in the fact that he enables others to come into the full possession of their own latent possibilities. Fourth point, some questions are more important than answers. You, as spiritual workers, must not lose sight of the real work the Master desires to get done through you. When it is clearly understood that spiritual wisdom is latent in all, you will no longer be anxious to provide others with ready-made answers and solutions. In many cases, you will be content to set up for others a new problem or to clarify for others the nature of the problems they face. You may have done your duty if you ask them a question that they would not ask of themselves when placed in some practical situation. In some cases, you will have done your duty if you succeed in putting them in a searching and questioning attitude so that they themselves begin to understand and tackle their problems along more fruitful and creative lines. To give them a deeper point of view or to suggest to them a fruitful line of thought and action may itself mean much more than thrusting upon them the results of your judgment. The questions that you may help them formulate for themselves should neither be merely theoretical nor unnecessarily complicated. If they are simple, straight, and fundamental, these questions will answer themselves and people will find their own solutions. You will have rendered indispensable and valuable service to them because without your tactful intervention, they would not have arrived at the solution of their multifarious problems from the spiritual point of view. Overcoming obstacles. It has been seen that spiritual workers must necessarily be confronted with many obstacles, but obstacles are meant to be overcome. Even if some of them are to be insuperable, you have to do your best to help others irrespective of results or consequences. Obstacles and their overcoming, success and failure are all illusions within the infinite domain of unity. Your task is already done when it is performed wholeheartedly. If you are steadfast and one-pointed in your desire to help my cause of awakening humanity to the sole reality and the ultimate worthwhileness of God and God alone, you will get many opportunities for spiritual work. There is ample scope for work in this field. You must do your work without worrying about consequences, irrespective of success or failure, but be confident that the result of work done in the spirit and with this understanding is assured. Results of spiritual work. Through the untiring activities of spiritual workers, humanity shall be initiated into a new life of abiding peace and dynamic harmony, unconquerable faith and unfading bliss, immortal sweetness and incorruptible purity, creative love and infinite understanding. This is again a very it flows from the previous chapter, but then he defines and gives the actual techniques and rules and contours of how his work has to be carried out. Any questions, comments?
I think for me, the first test is whether I am fit to do. So that analysis I have to do first, actually, whether I really start doing. Because once you put yourself into that kind of pedestal, trying to explain others or think that you are doing a spiritual work, probably I need to do a self-analysis whether I am myself, actually. So that's my take at the moment.
Jai Baba, I'd like to
Yeah.
say something. Once you have the humility to feel that you are nowhere, that is the first stepping stone, you know.
But
Once you
actually,
feel that you are nowhere, when you have the humility
yeah.
to feel like that, you'll be able to do so much more, because then you can understand much more about other aspects of spirituality, you know. So I'm sure you will
That's
be able
correct.
to do a lot of work.
Thanks, Jai Baba.
Kama?
Jai Baba, in this chapter there are some very interesting points. I think as Sanjay Nigam said is perfectly correct. I think it's very important to self-analyze and see where we are in this process before going and proselytizing about Baba. Second thing is, it says in the first para on the path, the most important condition of discipleship is readiness to work for the spiritual cause of bringing humanity closer and closer to the realization of God. So there is a chapter called True Discipleship, which we read in page 146. So that complements this chapter. And then the other one, it says about the whole world is firmly established in the false idea of separateness and being caught up in the illusion of duality. So in a very cerebral clinical sense, I say the whole challenge of life is it's a GOD, the acronym game of duality or get over duality. So technically speaking, is it possible for us to go above duality? That is the biggest challenge. And there is an expression in English as different strokes for different folks. So the path is always going to be very unique. And I think Baba is giving here as a template, what are the challenges that we will face. And the second other part is here he also talks about by identifying with the bodies, the soul gets caught up in the ignorance of manyness. For myself, I've seen this challenge. There's a lot of time when I lose self-awareness. We are always focused on the body, the gross body, subtle body, mental body. What are my emotions and feelings? What am I thinking? But the whole spiritual journey is about non-identification with the bodies. And this is, explained in detail by Nisargadatta Maharaj or even Ramana Maharshi and all the Advaita Vedanta people. And the second thing it says, the bodies with the ego mind are only the mediums or the vehicles of consciousness. To have this kind of self-awareness during the waking state is a very, challenging thing. And then he also says God realization is latent in them since it has not yet come to be experienced consciously. So, once you're a human being, you're already there. We have full and complete consciousness, but we are not God realized or awakened to it because of the sanskaras. So every human being, God realization is latent with them. And another thing is importance of time. I love that. I find that an important part because Baba, as you know, was so particular about time. We all take it for granted. About time. So I think that's an important lesson. The beauty about Baba's life was action speaks louder than words. He exemplified that. He didn't speak pure silence, but whatever action was perfect, because he's avatar, of course. But I think he gave us a template how life can be led by actually observing his own, his own life, from the time he got self-realization through the five perfect masters. And then the other part is, of course, those 4 points. For rendering spiritual help, you should have a clear understanding of the following 4 points. This is a fantastic template. I used to wonder, like, how can I, after I attain my financial security, what can I do with myself? I knew that first I have to unite with Baba, that's a long process. And but what I can do with my spare time, how can I go about and do some kind of work? Like what I'm doing now is just I'm going to schools and universities and talk about, career planning and development. But I also try to put in this, that my spiritual mentor is Baba. Why am I here? Like, so I try to talk about Baba in that sense. And I think another expression you have, like the acronym KISS, keep it simple, sweetheart, or keep it simple, stud, apparent descent to a lower level. That's how I look at the first point. The second point, spiritual understanding ensures all-sided progress. Departmentalized thinking is often an obstacle to integral vision, because in our material life we have compartmentalized everything, right? But I think spiritual understanding is about a holistic approach, what we call as a top-down approach. And the third part, spiritual progress consists in the spontaneous growth of understanding from within, which is very obvious. But again, the emphasis out here is a perfect master is absolutely necessary for anyone to arrive in self-knowledge. You almost see this sentence in most of the chapters. And the last one I want to say is, Baba says, if you are steadfast and one-pointed in your desire to help my cause of awakening humanity to the soul reality. So I think this expression, steadfast and one-pointedness, actually also applies to our day-to-day living. Every task we do, everything we do, I think we have to have that kind of one-pointedness. Jai Baba.
Jai Baba.
Okay, so we are almost out of time, so I will not take up the next chapter, but I believe it's qualifications of the aspirant, right, Kama?
Yeah, I think that would be the next four parts.
Yes.
It,
Four parts, and then we go to meditation.
Karthik, three things that came to mind that when learning for me is yesterday I saw the birds flying in the sky, and in the evening, and I felt that all the birds fly at different levels. Some birds fly low, some eagles fly very high, and eagles have longer life of 70 years plus if they want to, but they go through a very difficult process of transformation. After 40 years they go to the highest mountain and break their beak and they pluck their wings, and they really go through a lot of suffering themselves by doing all of that with themselves, and then they again come back in the transformation state and again fly very high. Now, the eagle is an example of what it does with itself for self transformation. And then sparrows fly at very low, and maybe some crows fly at a level, and swans fly at a different level. So I think in the creation itself, the souls fly at different levels. Though all of them fly, but they all fly at different levels, and integrating them is a very interesting aspect of Baba's work. How he wants everyone to be integrated in oneness. The other thing is, most of the time when we do this spiritual work, we end up preaching other people. What we believe is to be right, we go preach other people that this is the only right thing because I figured out this. Now, many times this goes above the head of other people because they just listen to everything but they don't do anything about it. The preaching mode does not work. The other thing is live examples are very important. Like, if you have to preach someone something, like I was telling about the parent-child relationship, also living, really giving an example, live example really works. So these are the three takeaways. Though there is a lot in this chapter that cannot be explained in words, but I don't think anyone else has authority other than Baba to say it the way he wants to say it. So I want to leave it at that. Jai Baba.
Jai Baba. Can I say something? Basically, when you sit with perfect masters or even the Mandali, or even with Baba, I mean, of course, Baba, of course, all these things are given and taken in silence, you know. They take off, they do so much work on you without you even realizing. There's no preaching necessary if you are with a perfect master, or if you are with them or sitting with the mandali. They just know everything about you. They know your past, your present, the future. And spiritual work, in my sense, is only something which is the grace, you know, because they know exactly what sanskaras to pull you. They kind of change your life completely. You know, I have had several experiences sitting with Bhauji or with you know, Muhammad Mast. You know, they do a lot of work. There is absolutely no preaching involved. You know, it is just that they know how to work through a consciousness level, which I may not understand. Jai
So
Baba. It's my experience.
Samira, that is
Yeah, I
really
think
great. That's really valid and really great. Yeah, it is true that in the company of highly spiritual aware masters, there is a lot of silent work that is happening. It is really true. So what next is the question.
Next is I mean, what next is you can work a little bit on yourself, however much you can do to the best of your ability. But the grace, but that's the, I don't know, I mean, but the spiritual work these masters do, when you sit with them or even think of them, is spiritual work which they know. You know, you can be open to them, you can, but they know what is best for you. You know, you can do only work to a certain degree, where you kind of, the only thing I could do basically is submission, complete submission to Baba. You know, whatever he does, whether I understand it or not, is for my best. That is, for me, is the only thing I can do. You know, submit my life, submit my children,
absolutely.
submit everything to Baba. Complete submission. Jai Baba.
Jai Baba.
Jai Baba.
Absolutely. Let your life be a living example of my message. So that's the Baba's message in real words.
Yeah, I think being a product of
And
Baba is
what
more important.
sorry, and what Nandita and what Namita is doing, you know, pure, just love is the most beautiful form of submission. When you see love and perfection, so-called imperfection, these are all degrees, you know. Even our children are not perfect. You can't even control them in your own stomach as a mother. You can't control their movement, you can't do anything, but you only can love them. You know, love is the most powerful tool Baba has given to us. It's only when he loves you and you realize that love through submission that you can pour love into everybody else's life. You know, it's what you get from Baba. Absolute, I mean, 100%, you know, whatever he's putting you through is out of love for you. And I think that for me is pure submission. And there's nothing more beautiful than just, that's by holding on to your Dhamman. I don't understand spirituality in any sense, but I can only understand that he's there in everything. Whether it's a table, you look after a table nicely, it'll give you love. You know, everything gives you love back. I mean, I don't know where I may be completely off, you know, but that's what my understanding of submission and Baba. Jai Baba.
Baba's love should overflow you, actually. It's when the pot is full. Yeah.
Jai Baba.
Jai Baba.
Beautiful, Samira. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sweetie. Jai Baba.
Jai Baba.
Baba.
Jai Meher Baba to all. Jai Meher
Jai
Baba.
Meher Baba.
Jai